Hi, welcome to another exciting episode of the Andre The Beast Crayton Show with my co-host, backed by popular demand, the one, the only, the philanthropist herself, Yolanda M. Smith. What's up, baby girl?
Woohoo! I showed up today, didn't I?
Yeah, you wasn't late either. I like that.
I wasn't late. I'm getting better about that. You know, they say time is money, but it's really not. It's, infinitely more valuable than money. So I'm respecting time more.
Today, we're going to go into the mindset of the political race here in Indiana, the Democratic Party, let's call it what it is, the Democratic Party, and find out the changes that's about to take place with this election, the individuals that, the one particular individual that's here in studio, we'll get to her in a minute, and what she plans to bring as far as change to this city moving forward. What do you got to say about that before we introduce her?
Well, I think for sure we need some change. Nobody's going to argue that, right? I mean, and just the fact that we've got a refreshing candidate that it has some refreshing ideas that can bring about. So excited to have Jennifer McCormick here with us today to really be able to talk about her platform, what we really need to do as a state, because she's going to represent the state of Indiana when she wins. You notice how I said when, not if, because we always are putting positive mindsets into place. So excited to have you with us, and definitely want to have an opportunity to share with the people what's going on, because we want to get you better penetration even into some of the minority markets so they know who you are.
Absolutely. Well, I so appreciate the invite and being here with both of you, and look forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. So I think one of the ways we can start, which would make sense, is just really, help people understand who you are. So share a little bit about who you are and why running for governor is important.
Yeah, so born and raised in Indiana. I am a fifth generation farm family. Also, I am an educator. I am a mom. I'm a military mom for sure. Very proud of that. I am a wife. I'm also just a longtime educator. I was Indiana's last elected state superintendent of public instruction. And so after I left office, they made that an appointment. Served 4 years at the state house, and through that time saw the good and the bad and some things that were pretty ugly. So for me, running for governor is just a way to say we deserve better, and all Hoosiers need a voice, not just a very small minority of Hoosiers who are having a voice right now, but we all need a voice, and we all need a champion for particularly our kids.
Jennifer, let me start out. You first started out on the Republican side, and then you switched over to the Democratic side. What brought that on?
Yeah, so even when I campaigned, I could see my values were not as aligned as I wish they would have been to the Republican Party, but the Republican Party has changed so much, and I think we've all watched it happen. I've always been fiscally conservative. I've also always been a champion for opportunity and smaller government and just being optimistic and taking care of each other. And when I got into office, it was unrecognizable. I saw a party who really was more focused on a very small fraction of Indiana. Really wasn't concerned about taking care of each other, did not look at the lens of opportunity, but what can we take away from people, very judgmental of people. And so I was like, this is not for me. So, it was just a matter of values, and started helping Democrats, the ones who I felt like, were more aligned to the values that I had, and have stayed true to those values and haven't looked back. So for me, it was really about values. I mean, it was just staying true to myself.
You mentioned the word conservative. You mentioned values. This is a two-part question. When you say conservative, what does that mean to you? And then the second part of that question is, what are your values?
Yeah. So for me, that fiscally conservative piece means, like, I know how hard all Hoosiers work at your jobs, and a lot of us pay taxes, and we work hard, and we understand that's part of it, but we have to have responsibility with that. So when our government is taking in that money, our taxes, they need to make sure we're getting a good return on our investment. So conservativeness means being very particular, not overspending what you're bringing in, but also making sure that we're prioritizing that spending. And I did not see that at the State House. I saw a credible amount of waste. I also saw it being targeted in areas that didn't make a whole lot of sense. So conservativeness in that space just means, understanding where that revenue is coming from and then being very careful about how it's prioritized. For me, it's about getting it to our kids and our families and our communities. It's not about taking care of the next biggest donor.
What needs to change right now moving forward in your eyes? You've been in different offices here in Indiana, but you also have a family. You've been around the community. What needs to change moving forward in Indiana right now?
Yeah, so we're in trouble in a lot of ways. Our statistics show that in education, we're 41st in the nation. In our healthcare costs, we're some of the highest in the nation. Quality of life, we're 47th in the nation. Annual wage growth, we're 47th in the nation. So our statistics aren't great. So there are a lot of things we need to address, but that gets back to making sure that we have our priorities set around people, not the political agenda that's coming from who knows where, out of state. That right now we are the epitome of Project 2025, which is very well written. They're very disciplined. They're very well resourced, but it's dangerous for what's happening in the future of Indiana. So for me, it's about getting back focused on childcare and universal pre-K and K-12 and making sure that we are providing good paying jobs and lifting up our unions and making sure every community has access to health care and it is affordable. 60 out of our 92 counties are declining in population, and when you have that, we're in trouble. And so there are a lot of different areas that Indiana needs to focus on, but that's not at all what we're doing right now.
When you talk about Project 25 and you talk about programs that are designed to help the lower class individuals when it comes to education and schools, those resources are put in place to basically help elevate the individuals that may not have the resources. What's your take on that? How structured are you for advocating for that?
Yeah, I know in part of Project 2025, it is very much an attack on education.
Right.
It's very much an attack on public education. They also are very much of a disbelief that childcare makes that big of a difference. And for me, childcare is about that readiness into school. It also helps our economy because people can get back into the workforce. But you have to make it affordable, and it has to be safe, and it has to be of quality. The education piece of it is very much about privatization, and 90% of our kids go to public schools.
Right.
And are we perfect? No. But when you're taking $1.6 billion away from our traditional public into private, there is a concern with that. Because remember, our private schools can say yes and no to who gets admitted. So our school choice is not about parents choosing or kids choosing. It is certainly about the schools deciding, do they like your income? Do they like the color of your skin? Do they like your zip code? Do they like your academic performance in the past? So I just disagree with where that's going in Project 2025 because it's going to carve out in Indiana a big chunk of our families.
And so do you think that's designed, though? Are they trying to say, okay, people, it's time to pick yourself up by the bootstraps and don't whine about things, but make things happen without necessarily having the resources to do that?
I don't. From what I learned at the State House, I think this has everything to do with resegregation. I think it has everything to do with who they want particular kids to go to school with. I am a firm believer that we are better when we're diverse and inclusive. Absolutely. I am a firm believer that's where our innovation comes from. That's where our success comes from. We're just better. And that's what public school is. I really think, this is all about pockets of admission of populations being eligible to go into certain schools. That has to do with socioeconomics, but it also in Indiana has to do with a lot of our ethnicities.
And so we see that playing out across the board. So you can say even at the K through 12 level, but also in the colleges, because now I'm just seeing that as a mom with a child in college, the cost to go to school is tremendously. Oh my God, it's ridiculous to have to pay this for an education and these kids to come out literally $200,000 and better in debt if you cannot afford to pay
And
cash
not
money
guaranteed
for
a
them.
job.
And not get and a
Yeah,
lot of them
yeah.
are then in minimum wage paying
Yeah,
jobs.
yeah.
So I mean, so the issue just seems very pervasive. But let me just ask you this, because this is what I see. I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. Okay, I see that a lot of money has been spent revamping the look of the schools in various township areas. But what does that have to do with the pay of teachers and the quality of teachers that we're putting into these schools to help the children?
Yeah, so the competitive edge of this is interesting. So in Indiana, we have been a free market. So it's all about being competitive. And if you are shopping for a school in K-12, many of our families base that upon an appearance. You know, and I talk to families and they're like, you know, my kid's a good football player. I want to play it on turf. I want it to be a football school. I want them to have access to a good practice field. I mean, the day of when I went to school where we were all on dirt and everybody had pretty much kind of a level playing field is gone. So when you're in a competitive market, a lot of it has to do with appealing to those parents who are making that decision. And, you know, whether my child's great at fine arts or performing arts, I want to see a theater that looks like I want it to look like. And so the facilities are huge in this. The other part of it is we've had so many new mandates on safety, which is good. We had to revamp some of our schools because of, you know, for instance, when I was a local superintendent, one of our elementaries had the office dead center in the school. And so parents could walk in and it could be a free-for-all before they showed up at that office, and we had to restructure. So there were just a lot of pieces that go into that, but that facility cost is real. I'm more concerned about, you know, we talk about we have all these choices and they keep expanding. And when you look at that, it's like, how much is enough? Like we can't afford all of it. It's no different than if I said, you know, I want 5 cars for myself. Well, that may be what you want, but can you afford it?
Right.
So we just keep offering more and more choices, but that funding isn't reflecting that. So there are a lot of pieces to it that are really concerning. It's not well thought out, but I would argue it's not meant to be well thought out.
Right.
That's not the name of the game with our school choice in Indiana.
So how do we fix it?
We change our leadership, because you're not going to change their minds. We have to break that supermajority. We have to make sure we get the governor's office. We need an AG who will support public education. So we have to change the people. That's the only way to go about making a difference. You know, it's interesting because Kentucky's pretty red, but Kentucky has fought privatization and they've won, because even their Republicans have said not here. Texas, pretty red. But Texas even said, not in our house, and they're still fighting it. And so there are other states that have said, we are going to embrace our public education and protect it. But Indiana, pretty much from the beginning, based on just a few really interesting leaders who that's where they wanted to go, and they had the power to do it.
Let's switch the topic over to something even more important. Your daughter's in college now. Mine's in college. We're worrying about the future. Like our Indiana people to stay in Indiana. Let's talk about the jobs. How do we get jobs here and not fast food franchises? How do we actually get sustainable employment in this state?
Yeah, the fastest growing jobs in Indiana right now require less than a high school diploma, and we cannot sustain that. Right. And I'm a mom. My child went through university. He served in the military. Now he's doing his master's. And I want to make sure that if he wants to come back to Indiana, that we are a state that he wants to be proud of. But when he comes back here, he has affordable housing. He has health care accessible to him, that he has an opportunity for retirement, that he has an opportunity to live and have a quality of life. And that includes also, they like to play. I mean, young people like concerts. They like to hike. They like to go do, you know, and so making sure that Indiana's taking care of the infrastructure needs that we have to make sure that happens. But right now, what I'm watching is young people are getting out, and they're looking at the jobs, and unless you are hitting a specific niche, you're going to struggle to find a good paying job. And then our healthcare costs are unbelievably high. And then our housing costs aren't keeping up. And when our wages are 47th in the nation, but our housing is reflective of what's happening across the nation, you can't do it. So kids are like, I have to live at home and save money for a couple years. Well, a lot of kids don't want to do that. So they're like, I'll look elsewhere. The other piece of that is I hear from so many university kids that they get internships and they're like, I'm in Cincinnati for an internship. And you know what? They get to Cincinnati and they're like, I got a great job offer. I can get an apartment. I got some friends over there. They got a lot going on in that area, or I'm going to go to Austin, Texas, or I'm going to go here. I mean,
so we lose them.
We lose them. And then we don't only lose them. Then what happens is they eventually find someone that they would like to maybe start a family with, and they eventually start a family. And then we've got this generation of people like me that I would say, okay, I want to be a part of that life with my grandchildren. And so when I retire, I may go there. So it's a multi-generational impact when we are losing our young people, and our young people are paying attention. They're like, we look ridiculous. So they're paying attention.
Oh, they are very woke.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
And not having it. How about
not
that?
having it.
Not having it.
I just need them to vote, because in
Yes,
Indiana,
let's
they are
vote.
not voting, and we're 50 out of 50 at the voter
Yeah.
turnout, and it's our young people, they are not voting.
Yeah, I just think that, yeah. What do we say? That's a good thing. What would you say to them to inspire them to really think hard and long and consider really getting out there and vote? Because I can tell you, for my daughter, she had never voted, but when Kamala Harris was voted vice president, it just sparked something in her that she got excited about it, and I think when you look at the opposition that she's competing with, I mean, it's very different, right? Very different in terms of values and things like that. But they're on the school front rallying their age group, that's the 20s,
Yep.
to get out and vote. So,
Yeah.
I mean, what could you say to them to really help them understand the importance and magnitude of this vote?
Yeah, part of it is making sure they're informed. And then I tell them they got to go inform others, because many of them are unaware that they're getting ready to, Senator Braun, my opponent, has said he doesn't agree with interracial marriage. He does not agree with same-sex marriage. He does not agree with public education. They're going after birth control. They're going after IVF. I mean, there's a whole lot that most kids are like, what? I mean, it's been 10 years since we let same-sex marriage. It's been about that, even longer for interracial marriage. And a lot of people are like, we don't want to turn back time. Like, we want to allow people to marry who they want to marry, be who they want to be, love who they want to, love. Young people don't like those restrictions and that judgmentalness that they're seeing. Young people don't like that.
So that's a big reason to get out and vote.
Well, I always tell them to take your age now and add 8 years, because realistically, this next governor is going to be in for 8 more years. So if you are 20, by the time the governor leaves, you're 28. Think about your life in those 8 years. And I know when you're young, it's really hard to do that, but it's like, do you want to have your own place to live? Do you want to marry who you want to marry, or be in a relationship who you want to be in a relationship with? Is that what you're thinking down the road? Would you want that now? Do you want, a lot of young people are very concerned about the access to birth control. They're worried about reproductive freedoms. If they get pregnant in that time and things get complicated, you could be in trouble. Yeah. So a lot of young people are starting to have their own little niche in what they're watching. Some people are like, are you going to legalize weed? That's all they want to know.
Yeah.
Like, you going to legalize it or not? And so we have that conversation. But they find what they're passionate about, and they just want to know. But they're so disheartened because it's been so ugly. It's been so divisive. And they're like, we don't want any part of it. But I'm like, you're going to lose your voice.
Yes.
If you don't vote, you're going to lose your voice. And too often we're seeing that happen.
Yeah. So young people, if you're watching, and we will make sure we get this out so you can see it, you have to claim your voice. Is sitting back and doing nothing is not an option. You must stand up and be heard. This is so important, and this election is so important on so many levels. And whatever side you're on, make your voice heard. That's the whole key about it. You know what I mean? You make your voice heard.
This is how you stop all that. Seriously, you're talking to a former school teacher. This is how you stop and you get people to engage. As governor, policies need to be enforced or reintroduced to the school system. And what I mean by this is pretty simple. I learned how to vote before I got out of high school.
Do they even have civics class anymore?
They don't have that.
Probably don't even have civics. They don't even know any. Yeah, that's amazing.
So what you do is you put together policies and enforce that particular teaching back into the school systems where these individuals are registered. These students are registered when they're 18 or 17 years old. They have to be taught the value of the vote and what the vote means. You have to meet people where they're at. We have to meet our kids where they're at now. My daughter had to teach me social media. Your kids had to teach you social media. We can't, like she said, we can't go back and reinvent the wheel. So in order to get the people to understand the power of the vote and to understand our message, you got to use.
Well, you got to educate them.
Right.
You got to educate them, and that's what you were saying. They just don't know.
They're
not aware. But is our school system helping with that?
They have to, and you know what? Honestly, some are, but many of them aren't because they get nervous because of the retaliation of a one-party rule. Republicans ruling for a lot of time. As soon as they start talking about, we're not telling kids who to vote for.
Right.
We're saying you got to be registered, you got to vote because that's exercising your voice. And a lot of them are like, I'm not even going there because it's so dicey right now in our school systems.
That's amazing.
It's crazy, but I also know too, I've been, being in that school recently, I get it. I mean, I get what they're saying.
You don't want the backlash.
That's right. That's right. And and other states are very aggressive, and as soon as you get your license, you are registered to vote and you're good to go. Or, we
can draft you to the military if we want to.
That's right.
But we can't, And
it's very triggered. Like as soon as you do X or upon graduation, you fill it out in other states and you're automatically in. And those kids who don't maybe graduate, they figure out like, okay, upon exiting, here's what you're going to do. So other states are very, very aggressive about it. Mm-hmm. Indiana on purpose, the Republicans do better with voter suppression. So even we're 50 out of 50th. And what did they do this last session? They made it harder to vote. They took away free transportation this year. They're making it harder and harder to vote.
Have 10 pieces of ID. I know I'm exaggerating, but
I mean, but silly, silly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let me go to another question that's been all over TikTok, and we see this guy speaking of civil rights and so forth. We're seeing a widespread of unlawfulness with people in power, with the police badges and people being afraid of law enforcement. And now you got people really amplifying their constitutional rights and so forth. What's your take on that? Because it's all over the internet. I mean, heck, I get to the point where I'm scared if law enforcement comes up to me, am I forced to give them my identification? Have I committed a crime? I mean, like, what's your take on unlawful force and people behind the badge using their badge as a way to wield power against the average individual?
Yeah, and obviously there are some great law enforcement officers out there who do not abuse that power. And there are others that, we read about the others who abuse the power. And when people tell me, we read story after story in Southern Indiana, look what just happened with one of the big sheriffs down there, and he was high up in the Republican Party. And it was crazy everything that was happening. My own county, I could tell you stories about concerns about our sheriff. And so it does come down to, abuse of the power. And we need our law enforcement to be good partners in our community to keep us safe, because God knows our gun laws need a lot of work. But we have to change the people in order to set that expectation and make it, and have it differently and hold people accountable. We have to change the leadership. That's what's got to happen.
Yeah, because where are the checks and balances?
Yeah. That's it. I mean, we could change policies, but if no one's going to hold you accountable, you're what's the point? We have to change the people who are going to hold people accountable.
You seem to have a lot on your plate getting ready to go into office. What are the three major things that you feel once you get into office that has to be top priority right now in order to let people know that you mean business and that you're definitely going to make a change?
Soon as we're in office, it's budget time. So the budget will reflect priorities. And for us, those priorities are, we've got to restore women's reproductive rights and freedoms. We have women who are dying. We have a majority of our women who are in our minority areas we're third in the nation in maternal mortality and infant mortality. That's got to stop. And the trend data is horrific. So that whole piece of reproductive freedoms is beyond, it's healthcare. There's a lot of healthcare issues with that. So the healthcare piece is huge. Whether whether it's freedoms or access or costs, that healthcare piece is impacting all of us. We're a very unhealthy state, but it's hard to blame people when you look at, well, you don't have access to a pediatrician, you don't have access to an OBGYN, you don't have access to anything within 45 minutes. And so it is happening in Indiana, and it's ridiculous. We're in 2024, and that's got to change. We also got to take care of our healthcare providers, and that's a piece of this. So healthcare, education, I'm passionate about it. We've got to make sure that childcare is ready to go, universal pre-K, and that K-12 piece is funded. I mean, we cannot move our economy if we don't get the education piece right. It's the foundation to democracy. It's the foundation to our economy, and it's a foundation to our communities. We are all depending on getting that right. And then good paying jobs. I mean, we put out an economic development plan that would bring down property taxes for everybody, but also develop good paying jobs, incentivize small business and targeted regional grants as small business grants, particularly women and minorities that are trying to launch and stay afloat but are struggling to get equal access to many of the programs we have. So really those three buckets of healthcare, education, and then that economy with the wages and the business development will be our biggies. I mean, sure, we have lots of roads that are in horrible shape. Yeah. We've got a lot of environmental issues, but realistically, the priorities will be the healthcare, education, and jobs.
Start somewhere.
That's right.
It's like
That's
how
right.
do you eat an elephant? One
That's
bite
right.
at a time, right?
Yeah. It's been 20 years.
This is interesting. That I'm glad to see that you're tackling the child care issue. My son has a daughter, and they are paying between $1,500 and $1,700 a month, which is more than their mortgage, to put that kid in daycare. And I said to them, are you guys going to have another child? And he said, Mom, if we do, we're poverty stricken. If they have another child, because of the cost of daycare, they said they would be at the poverty level. There's just no way they would be able to sustain it. So we've got child care holding families hostage from having more children and expanding their family just because it's not affordable.
Well, and I hear our General Assembly, talk about all these people that won't get off their couch and go to work. I'm like, they can't, because they have nowhere to send their child. So they can't afford to work and childcare. And they're like, well, there are places they could send their child, but they're not safe. They're not of quality. And so, as a mom, I was a working mom, and I was lucky, but I found someone who was in our neighborhood that understood readiness, and she had her own grandkids, and she's like, what's one more? So he was kind of like their family, but I was lucky. I mean, we had limited access where we were at as well, but boy, there are so many Hoosiers that are in childcare deserts. And if they do have it, it is so crazy expensive that you better hope you have a really, really good paying job in order to make it work. So the child care piece is huge.
Let's talk about something even more devastating. And you saw this recently when we went to go look at a particular place. The inflation of individuals raising rent astronomical, especially right after the COVID hit, where it just seemed like there was no guidelines set in place. Now, people can't even afford to get a place to live now. What's your take on that?
Well, and you've got in Indiana, it's interesting, you have a lot of the same players that are gobbling up homes, apartment complexes,
these investors.
And so you are limiting access by out of state, usually people who, they're not concerned if we have Hoosiers on the street. They're not concerned if, our homelessness, whether it's you're on the street or you're in grandma's apartment or you're in on your friend's couch and you're couch surfing. So yes, we've got to get a check on that, but it's about, getting our property taxes in check for our renters and our homeowners. It's also about fair lending practices. It's also about, discrimination issues that we're seeing play out. So there are some great organizations who are working on it, but you got to have a partnership, and they got to be at the table with the governor to say, what can it take? I'm not a housing expert, but we've got some really good ones that would help with this, to say, what are the solutions? And many of them are like, we're ready to go. We're ready to help. We need someone to ask.
And do we realize that a lot of these investors are coming out of the country?
Yeah.
And gobbling up this property? Yeah. They're coming out from
and we'll
other
never
countries.
get it back.
And no, we'll never get it back. And even the way they're positioning themselves around, that's a whole nother
And then,
but they are positioning themselves around even like military installations and different places like that. That's another theory. But here in Indiana, our homeowners association had to come in and clamp down and put their foot down and say, we are not allowing rental homes without certain criterias in this subdivision, because we sometimes know what that can do, in a mix, because you're right. If they're not there managing and monitoring, and they're just charging high prices, and whoever can pay it gets in regardless of who they are, what they are, the character and so forth. And the neighborhoods just seem to take a hit off of that. And you look at some of these neighborhoods that become primary rental neighborhoods, and oh my God, beautiful neighborhoods look like crap.
Well, did you just see the apartment complex that made national news here in Indiana, that the low income and it had changed so many ownerships that the people went in, they had no lights, no water, but they was paying. And nobody took accountability, and those people wind up getting evicted. But I think the state stepped in and helped a little bit. These things things gotta stop. I mean, like this is crazy.
No checks and balances.
No checks and balances.
And it's interesting because when I go into areas, they're like, "Oh, we're building a lot of affordable housing right now," and I'm like, "Well, where's it at?" And they'll tell me, and I'm like, "Well, what's affordable to you?
Thank you.
What's affordable?" Yeah. And they'll be like, "Well, they start at $3." I'm like, $300,000
is that
not affordable.
Yeah.
So they're like, "Well, our thought is, people will buy up, and then their affordability." And I'm like, "They're not moving." Like, people are not doing that because it's so expensive right now that, so their affordable housing that they're building, I'm like, I'm not sure who that's affordable to.
I've asked that same question to several politicians. Like, what do you consider affordable housing?
Exactly.
$3,000 for a studio, and you call that affordable?
Yeah.
Where?
Right. Yeah, this rent, it is.
Well, and then you build a $300,000 home, and someone's got to have 20% down, and it's like, who can do that? Like, who can do that?
Yeah.
And so it's like, that's not affordable. And the thought of, well, someone will move into it and leave a smaller home available. I'm like, we guessing? Or I mean, like,
that's not happening.
Yeah.
So let's ask this. Okay, so to the viewers out there that are listening to us right now, I mean, Jennifer McCormick is definitely the candidate for governor for the state of Indiana. It is time for a change. We need to change a lot of things, and one of the things that I know for a fact is that we always say we want change. To change, we have to change. Right. We have to be about the change. What would you say to them? Why you and why now?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the choice is clear. And I know in every election we hear, this is the biggest election of our lives. I think that's true. From the federal level and saving our democracy to the state level, it's really no different. It's about, do we want someone who will be a voice for us or someone who will not? It's about someone who will fight for our kids or someone who won't fight for our kids. It's about someone who will make sure we have a quality of life in the state of Indiana or someone who won't. I mean, it's just, the choice is so clear. And I am not a multimillionaire. I mean, Mike Braun, my opponent, was one of the wealthiest senators in the nation. And so for me, I know the price of eggs and I know the price of gas. I know what it takes to struggle to have childcare. I was an educator. I mean, we had two working jobs. My husband and I both were working parents, but I know what that means to worry about rent and a car payment and get your cell phone paid. And, I understand the challenges of everyday life. I've also lived in suburban areas, urban areas, and rural areas. I know the differences and I also know the similarities, but we have to have someone in that office who will fight for every Hoosier and not just a small pocket of Hoosiers who they deem are worthy of their leadership. And so I will fight for everybody.
Awesome.
Wow, that's a lot of information. I was going to ask another question before we wrap up, but shit, I think she covered.
We can leave it right there, right?
Yeah, yes. I think she's covered everything.
This has been amazing.
Jennifer, thank you so much for coming in and being on the show, and I encourage all the individuals to get out there, do your research, because that's what it's all about. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but know what your topics are, understand what's important to you. Do your research on all the candidates and stuff. Jennifer, I love your platform. I like everything you're preaching right now. It sounds good, and especially when you say what is affordable housing, what is reproductive for women about, and so many beautiful topics, so many great answers. Yolanda, thanks for taking time out to come on, sit in your chair,
in my chair.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another exciting episode of the Andre the Beast Crayton.